All right, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Module 1. We're in the first week here of the Maymester, and it is Tuesday if you're doing this on time. Today we're going to look at more financial statements. Last class, we studied the balance sheet, and we got a snapshot of our financial health. Now we're going to look at the income and expense sheet and the budget, which are going to be more forward-looking tools to think about. Okay, here's the position I'm in today. Um, Here's why I'm in that position, and what can I do going forward to change that position. As we're going through this lecture, there's a few things you might want to have. The first of which is the handout. Again, we can go into Georgia View. You can see on the right-hand side all the modules. In Module 1, you can look at day 2, look at our lectures, materials, and you will see right there the handout and the slides for this lecture. So go ahead and pick up the handout. We're going to be using these financial sheets in the lecture. Pick up our workshop instructions for the day. I'll get to this a bit later. You'll also need to download the Excel spreadsheet that it says WS Mod1Day2 for budgeting. So we're going to work on completing those today. But for right now, just the handout and the slides or the video that you're watching right now. Okay. So we're going to be thinking about the income and expense statement, which answers where did all of my money go? And by the way, I'm not going to show them, but we got some funny YouTube videos here and later on. If you'd like some entertainment within the slide deck, click on those. This is a Saturday Night Live episode here, and later on I got something from the Cosby Show. But check that out on your own if you'd like. So the income and expense statement answer the question, where did all my money go? So it is a measure of financial performance over a given period of time. So the balance sheet was a frozen moment in time. Today, what is my financial health? The income and expense sheet looks back over a given time period, typically a year. It's going to combine all of your sources of income with all of your expenses, so your cash flows in and your cash flows out, to compute whether or not you have cash surpluses or deficits. And so these are all recorded in cash basis, which means money has to move for it to show up on the income and expense sheet. So how's this useful? Well, you can immediately think about it this way. If you need to increase your net worth, it has to be the case that your income is higher than your expenses, so you can take what's left over, that surplus, and put it into assets to increase your net worth. And so that's why we're going to be looking at, well, last year, where did all my money go? And then, of course, the budget's going to come through and think about how can I change that behavior. So this is what a typical income and expense sheet looks like. This is not the one you have in your handout, but we will use the one in your handout here in a minute. But what you can see in the top part is income. So for Cindy and Ross, over the entire last year, so they're doing this on the last day of December 2015. So this is everything they earned in 2015. And what you want to note about the income here is it's a gross amount. It's before taxes and anything else comes out of it. Those deductions from income are all going to be taken care of down here in expenses. So the income statement starts out with income sources. Then we will add to that, we will take from that, expenses, which is cashed out. And we want to group these by type. The reason is if I have a problem with my net worth or my solvency, I need to be able to see exactly where my money is going. What things am I spending my money on? And so you can notice a few things on here that are sort of fixed. Housing expenditures, utilities, insurance, right? Things that I have to pay for. There's taxes, right? Taxes coming out of my paycheck. But one thing you also notice is that we are going to keep track of discretionary items as well. So here I got vacations and other recreation entertainment. So this might be your capital city bill for the year. Here's clothes, shoes, and accessories. and dining out and groceries. All of these things might be places we look to try to lower our expenses if we're getting ourselves into trouble. Take all of our incomes on the year, all of our income for the year, subtract all of our expenses for the year, and what's left over is a cash surplus or deficit. And so you see this family here ran a sizable cash surplus. So this stuff is going to go towards perhaps increasing their net wealth in some way, like assets or savings. So we use the income and expense sheet for information, right? If you have a large negative net worth, then you have more liabilities than assets. You might want to correct that. The way you need to do this is you need to pay down your debts in order to increase your assets, or at least your net assets minus liabilities. And so the I&E sheet is going to show you where your money is going. If you can increase that cash surplus, then you can pay down debts, you can increase your investments and assets, and you can affect your net worth. The punchline is what we're going to do eventually say, hey, I probably need to change my behavior in some way to fix or increase my net worth. So I'm going to budget. I'm going to take what I learned from the year back from today, and I'm going to budget for the entire year ahead to try to increase my cash surplus. So the budget is going to look forward, whereas the income and expense sheet looked back. And so some things that we can do to help understand exactly whether or not we're in a good financial position, because we've calculated a cash surplus and we've calculated a net worth. And so we can say whether we're solvent or insolvent, but how much net worth is good? Are my levels of expenses okay? The way we're going to think about this is to use some financial ratio analysis. So what I would like you to do right now is pause this video and open up a second video that's in your module folder for day 2. It's called Mod1Day2 Board Work video. I'm going to walk through on a whiteboard some calculations of ratios using the handouts that you have. So you'll need the chapter 2.3 to 2.5 lecture personal finance sheets to work through these ratios. After we get done with those ratios, we're going to resume this video and interpret them. So go ahead and pause it now and watch that video and take notes, and then come back to this one. Okay, so as we saw in the board work video, we came up with a solvency ratio of 33.45%. And we talked about how the way to interpret this is this family can withstand a 33% drop in the market value of their assets before insolvency. Well, how does that hold up? That's pretty good. But one way to get a picture for this is to look at how the stock market moves over time. So you've probably seen a theme in a few lectures here that we had this big recession between 08 and 09 that caused a lot of downward motion in the economy, right? Lost jobs, lost production, lost stock values. And so if you had, say, a retirement account or a lot of your investments in stocks, particularly those in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is what I'm showing right now, the market value of those assets would have fallen a great deal. So certainly people lost net worth. How much? Well, if we look at the difference between the peak and around the end of 2007 and the trough down here at the just after 2009, somebody who had basically indexed the Dow Jones Industrial Average with their investments would have lost over 50% of their asset value. Now, that's extreme drop, right? We had a big recession, but maybe at 33%, they want to be a little bit more, have a little bit more cushion there in their solvency ratio. We look at our liquidity ratio. Remember, that was 12.9%. And also recall that the liquidity ratio is the percent of the year that a person can cover their current debts without liquidating any long-term assets or finding new income, right? So like another job or selling off I don't know, another property owned or a stock. How much can be covered out of liquid assets? And so 12.9% of the year was 1.5 months. So you do 12.9 times 12 months in a year to find out how many months that is. And so if we look at some measures of unemployment, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics from 1976. That's quite old. So let's look over here to 2006 to 2011. And I want you to look at this bluish line here and this red line here, and this axis on the side. So what these lines are plotting is the average weeks of unemployment and the median weeks of unemployment when somebody becomes unemployed around these years. And so what we see is we've got 1.5 months of, or this the person that the ratio that we just studied has 1.5 months of coverage where they can pay their debts without finding any new sources of income. But if things get bad, people can be unemployed for anywhere between 20 and 40 weeks, which 40 weeks is, getting up to, well, I don't want to say almost an entire year, but nobody has a lot of coverage for that. So the rule of thumb here for the liquidity ratio is you really want to have a 6 to 9 months emergency fund saved up to cover yourself in the case of an unemployment. In case you're unemployed for 6 months, you'll have enough emergency funds to continue to provide for yourself while you're searching for a new job, because the duration can be quite large. Lastly, with the debt service ratio, that talked about the proportion of your income that you bring in that goes back out to debts. And so here we've got 19.2% of this family's gross income each month is paid to debt. A rule of thumb, again, this is not hard and fast, is that the debt service ratio is considered manageable if it's below 30 or 35%. So that is how we think about our income and expense worksheet and our balance sheet working together and getting a picture of our financial health. The next question is what to do about it. So you're either insolvent or you're close to it. You're highly leveraged, which means you have a lot of debt, or you might be in sound financial shape, but you need to work towards long-term goals. So all of this speaks to a budget. And so here's a funny video from the Cosby Show. So you can watch that if you have time. So we're going to think about a budget, because the budget is the forward-looking plans for your cash. You got a snapshot in time with the balance sheet. You looked backwards on the year to see where your money was going. And now here's your chance to plan to change that path if you desire to do so. And so there's really 3 things that go into budgeting. You have to estimate your income going forward. You have to estimate your expenses going forward. And then the cash budget is basically your roadmap. That's your plan. When you're estimating, so students freak out when they have to estimate things because of the level of uncertainty. But budgeting is a highly uncertain endeavor because the future, it just is uncertain. So when you're budgeting, you want to be pessimistic. And what that means is if you're unsure about your income source and you say you kind of know some distribution, like, oh, my future job might earn between 40 and 50,000. Being pessimistic would be what? If you thought you could earn $40,000 to $50,000 but were unsure, what would be the pessimistic choice for your budget? It would be the lower one, $40,000, right? You want to go with less income. That way, if there's more, you're more comfortable and you're still covering your expenses. What about with expenses? You're really unsure about utilities in Georgia. It's really hot in the summertime. You're not so sure about the winter. So how much is your air conditioning gonna run up your electric bill in August? Well, you have an idea, and you know that on average, before you moved into your own home and your apartment, you spent about $100, but you know you heard your parents spend about $250. What would be pessimistic? Well, picking something more towards $250. That way, if your bill does come in lower, you've got a lot more cushion there in your budget. And you can always adjust your budget when you learn new information about your estimates. So this is what the annual cash budget looks like. This is the one that you have in your handout. And it's a lot to look at once, so let's narrow it down. The first thing to notice is that the last column is the total. Actually, back up. The first thing to notice is that look at the date, December 31st, 2017. So this is this family who did their snapshot at the end of the year, looking forward to the end of 2017. So there's some disconnect in my files here, but they did all of their analysis for 2016. They did their ratios and their backward looking income and expense, and now they're looking forward to the year ahead. This last column looks really close to the income and expense worksheet because here's our incomes and here's our expenses. There are a few differences, however. On the budget sheet, what you're going to go ahead and put here is your take-home pay, which means you're going to pull taxes out before you even put it in there. Taxes are a given, and so you're going to only consider what you're able to spend for the rest of the year. Take-home pay. Down here in expenses, one thing that's going to show up is savings and investments. And so that wasn't treated as an expense in our income and expense sheet because the cash surpluses were what we were looking at for basically savings and investment purposes. On your annual cash budget, however, you're going to build these in. The reason is you've found out that you need to correct some sort of problem with your net worth, perhaps, or you want to gain net worth. One way to do that is to save. But we're going to learn in this class, saving doesn't mean just tucking your money underneath a mattress until it piles up. We're going to think of different places to put it, and we're going to have plans, right? We create a bunch of goals. Maybe you want to buy a house. And so these savings and investments might be mapping towards a down payment on a house. So we're going to plan to do them and treat them like an expense rather than let them happen and build up recklessly, not thinking about where they're going. We're going to have goal-driven savings and investments. The last thing is at the bottom is a diagnostic row. It tells you the months where you're going to have trouble and the months where you're okay. On the year, at the end, we can see whether we have a cash surplus or cash deficit. Do we have enough money? Do we have enough income to cover all the expenses for the year? However, looking across the months, we see within a given month, sometimes it's not always the case that we have a surplus. In some months, we have big old deficits. And so we need to know when these are coming along and plan for them. So let's think about that for a minute. Suppose your annual budget is in surplus, which means you make more in income than you spent in the year, or you're going to make more in the year ahead than you're going to spend per your projections. But you got some months that are not in surplus. What do you do? Well, let's look at March for this family. They have a deficit of $3,215. When you look up and down the rows, their income really didn't change that much. Housing didn't really change that much, but we got spikes in food, clothing, and recreation and entertainment. So what it looks like is this family is taking a trip in March, and they have this cash deficit here. So what are some things you can do to fix this? Right? How would you make sure that this stays positive on the year? Well, one thing we can do is shift expenses from months with surpluses to months with deficits. That is actually backwards. So we're going to fix this. You're going to shift the expenses to the months with a surplus from the months with the deficits. We're doing this live, people. So those expenses in months with a deficit, well, we're going to try to move some. So that might be, okay, this month I don't buy as many clothes as I normally would. It's $150 for shopping. Let's take it out of this month and let's move it to somewhere, let's say June, where I have a comfortable surplus. That'll help with the deficit. Or fun money, right? If I've got all this recreation and entertainment going on for that trip, maybe I reduce my fun money and move it over to another month, right? I move, all right, so I reduce my fun money and move it over here to the deficits, right? Same thing with clothing. I don't buy clothing in June and I move it over here to opposite. So I take my fund money expense and I don't spend it here, and I don't spend it here. The other thing I can do is liquidate some savings to cover that month. So this is not ideal because you're saving for something. And so if you liquidate some of your savings, then you are probably going against a goal or pulling from your emergency fund. So we don't really want to do that either. And the last thing we can do is use short-term borrowing, which would be credit cards. But that's not a good idea because if you take out a credit card, what that's going to do is add an expense to another month, not necessarily remove it from your balance sheet. So again, I've I've got big old surpluses here. One thing I can do with my surpluses here is move and cut some expenses. So like I said, I could not buy clothing here, reduce that expense and move it over to a month with a surplus. I could take fund money and just maybe cut it out altogether. Some of these other expenses, personal care, you don't want to be unhygienic, but maybe move that to another month with a surplus, moving these expenses to another month to get rid of these deficits and stay positive across the board. Now, one thing that I would mention is this doesn't look like it was a planned trip because this was a deficit, but if you did plan for some sort of vacation, what I would do is when you liquidate your savings for that trip, put it up here in other income, right? This is income from liquidated savings, and then you save for that trip, and it's not going to make you look like you're insolvent here, that you have a deficit. It'll make you look positive. Okay. Now, let's suppose your annual budget does not balance. So what does that mean is that your expenses are simply too high. You can't move expenses around across months because the fact is within the entire year ahead, you're projecting to earn less income than you're spending. So what you need to do is plan to cut low priority expenses from the budget completely or increase your income. The first one is the easier of the two. How can I stop spending so much money? The second one is more difficult because you'll need to find another source of income. If those two are not possible, you have to liquidate savings to cover the year. And so that's not good because, once again, if you have planned to save for something, you're not going to have the funds anymore to reach those goals, and it throws your goals off. So we really want to be good with our budgeting going forward so that we don't get ourselves into situations where you have to cut, where you have to liquidate savings. So this can't be a regular practice. It can only be something that fixes your maybe 1 year issue with insolvency. Okay, that is all in the lecture. So we're going to start the workshop. And what you'll do is open up your instructions. So this really kicks off the portion of the class where you are going to be financially planning for yourself in the year after you graduate. What we're going to do is fill out this cash budget for you. And I know it's daunting, but it's going to be very, very useful going forward. We're going to plan this for the year after you graduate. So not this year. And if you are a sophomore or junior, you're thinking a couple years ahead. The first thing you need is income. So what do you want to be when you grow up? If you haven't thought of it yet, but now might be a good time to think about it, especially in this forward-looking financial planning class. So you're going to visit this website by clicking on the link, and you're going to find the median salary for your future career. And I mean the median starting salary. And I'll show you how to do this in a minute. What that's going to give you is something on the annual basis, and you're going to convert it to a monthly basis by dividing by 12. I don't want you to worry about getting your income tax correct completely. For now, remove 35% from your monthly income. 35% might seem large, but it's actually very close to what will probably actually come out of your paycheck. So we'll get this more accurate in the future, but just take out 35% for now. If you're having trouble finding your exact career, get close. You can use another starting salary estimator. Just make sure you cite it in your budget. Tell me where you got somewhere in this Excel spreadsheet. Tell me where you got that data from. And then if I'm interested, I won't place your projected career next to your name in the Excel spreadsheet. And if anything, when you look back to this after you do graduate, if you didn't go in the career you thought you were going to go to, it might be a interesting little time capsule for you. So, one thing to help you is not that one. This is what the website looks like. So let's do something like a career in logistics. Here we have line cook. Next, see what we can find. Logistic clerk. Let's go with that. So a logistic clerk has a median starting salary of $47,585 with a pretty good range. You can refine this by where you think you're going to live. In fact, I encourage you to do that. So if you're going to end up in, let's say, let's go down to Georgia, Macon, you can refine that search a little bit more and get even more accurate data. And so here's where our median sits at 45,342. So that would go here in your take-home pay after you remove the 35% taxes. Then, for example, the second part of the worksheet says we need to estimate some expenses. So you have a whole host of expenses here to think about: housing and rent, utilities, food, clothing, etc. How much do you spend each month for all the months in the year? And so how might you do this? Well, let's consider your housing, right? If you're going to live in Atlanta or Macon, we might do something like look at Zillow. By the way, if you find these websites by just Googling, rent estimator, utility estimator, food estimator. So I might be looking at to rent in Macon. And there's a whole bunch of renting options. And so you might come through here and say, all right, I plan on renting a house, or I plan on renting an apartment. And so you can find different estimates for rent based on location and where you want to live here. And so that's going to be your decision. And so do that for the rest of your estimates. One thing keeping in mind is, utilities probably don't stay constant every month. Your recreation probably doesn't stay constant if you plan a trip. So be forward looking. Where are your expenses going to come, and how much do you think to make each year? All right. That is the end of this lecture.